start. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Cabinet. First item on the agenda is apologies, and first of all, apologies from the leader, Councillor Peter Fox. As many of you will know, Peter has had a family bereavement recently, so he is away for a few days, but I'm sure you'd all want to join with me in extending our condolences to his wife, Jo, on the death of her father, Mike Christopher. As well as Peter's absence, we are also not, we don't have Giles Howard with us either. He has sent his apologies. So could we just begin, for those that aren't in the chamber, those watching perhaps, by going along Cabinet members and indeed leaders of the opposition parties and just introduce ourselves, starting at the end, Liz?
Hello, Councillor Liz Hackett-Page.
As well as Peter's absence, we are also not, we don't have Giles Howard with us either. He has sent his apologies. So could we just begin?
Phil Murphy, County Councillor for Caerwent, and my cabinet responsibility is resources.
Bob Greenland, Deputy Leader with responsibility for enterprise, leisure and culture.
Hello, Phil Hobson, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Community Development and Sustainability.
County Councillor Jeff Burrows, Cabinet Member for Social Services, Adults, Children and Health.
Good afternoon, Deputy Leader. Councillor Simon Howarth, Independent Leader.
County Councillor Maureen Powell, Observing, Castleward, Abergavenny.
Okay, as and when I will introduce officers, I hope I get the names and job titles right. I bet I won't, but help me if I don't. So we move on to item number 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest?
As and when, Chair.
Okay, as and when, and we then move on to item 3, consideration of reports from select committees. We've received none, so we can move on to item 4, the consideration of the following reports. And 4.1 is the Monmouthshire Local Development Plan Community Infrastructure Levy. In the absence of Councillor Howard, I will introduce this item. As many of you will know, 106 agreements have been an important part of the process of this council in bringing in finance to help development, to help provide important social benefits in terms of leisure and other facilities when new houses are developed within the council. I think it has always been the case that it kicks in when there are 5 or possibly 10 houses being built at one time. This is to be replaced by something called the Community Infrastructure Levy, which is actually being replaced throughout the United Kingdom. But in England, they've decided to do it. In Wales, they have also decided to adopt it, but I think there might be some subtle differences in Wales. I'm not too sure about that. But essentially, a figure is arrived at the amount of contributions that each new house built in the county should provide because of the additional services that the council will have to provide throughout its area. The 106 monies were very local. They were given to perhaps a local cricket club or a local bowls club or anything in the immediate vicinity. And that was where most of the distribution of the 106 monies went. I think it is recognised that these days people use their leisure in a much wider geographical area, and therefore it's much more appropriate that we should be looking at spending that money in a wider geographical area. It doesn't mean to say that 106 agreements are going to go completely, because there will still be a need to put in infrastructure, for instance, for housing developments, before we get to the point at which houses are built. But once planning permission has been granted for a house, then the community, the CI, what's it called? The CIL will come into being. Quite a few different rules about it that will apply, but the one thing that we have got to do this afternoon is to look at the amount of money that is being suggested by officers that will come forward for each of these houses. From here, the report will go on, if we agree these recommendations, for ratification by council. So we're in a part of a process here. One of the other issues is that, and it's different from the 106 agreements, is that it is expected that 15% of the allocation will be given to community councils and indeed town councils for them to distribute locally. Now, as we know, not all of our community councils in Monmouthshire would have the opportunity to properly deal with that money, in which case it would come back to the county council. But there is that difference in this and the 106 monies. I don't think I really need to say much more than that at this time. I'm sure officers will want to come in, but we have with us this afternoon George Ashworth, Head of Planning, and Martin Davis, who is our Development Control Manager. So would either of you at this point like to say anything, or shall we move to Cabinet members? Okay, thank you. So open to Cabinet members. Any comments, colleagues?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. I'm referring to section 123, was what you can spend the SIL on, which is quite wide-ranging on infrastructure projects such as transport, etc. In relation to that, the 15% levy, which goes to town and community councils, will there be a requirement to spend the money on that criteria, or town and community councils at this present moment under the proposals free to spend that money as they see fit?
Community councils wouldn't be bound by the Monmouthshire County Council's infrastructure plans, but they would need to spend it on infrastructure or other facilities to support development in their area. So I think the guidance says they could, for instance, use it to support affordable housing, which is something Monmouthshire County Council couldn't do because affordable housing has to be done through Section 106s. So I think the discretion does lie with the community council as to what they would spend the money on, but it is a legal requirement that is to support development in the area. So it has to be facilities or other items of expenditure that actually supports development in that community council area.
Yeah. So are we saying that town and community councils could use this in funding capital one-off new projects? Because my fear would be that some councils which are getting a windfall of money they're not used to and having to handle this may inadvertently use it to fund existing commitments rather than improving local infrastructure. That's my fear. And I'm just wondering, in this mix completely, is there going to be support, guidance, mentoring from county for town and community councils on how best to make use of this new money that's going to be coming into their coffers?
Yes, I would have thought that would have to be the case, that the county council would be in the best position to provide professional advice on how the money is spent, and also sort of like legally that they are meeting legal obligations and complying with the regulations. And where they haven't got the community council might not have the ability to spend it themselves, then the county council could do it for them, but obviously with an agreement on what the spending priorities are.
Can I just add there, if I may, that I would hope as well that town and community councils will sign up to whole place planning and that therefore there will be a much more complementary relationship, I think, between the local authorities as to how the money is spent as well. So I think whole place planning has an important role to play here, particularly if the town and community councils sign up, as we hope they will. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Bob. This question was raised actually in my last meeting with my head of waste, who you will all know, and she asked the question: why is it that when we talk about, for want of a better word, 106 money, I know we're talking about something slightly different here, but you know, the subjects covered here are sustainable transport improvements, upgrade of broadband connectivity, education and strategic sports, adult recreation facilities, and all sorts of other stuff. And yet, her division can be responsible for collecting waste from an extra 5,000 houses at the end of the LDP, and she will have not a penny piece more put into her budget. I don't think it's an unfair point. Could somebody answer it for me, please?
Deadly silence.
Yeah.
Yes, the regulations talk about infrastructure to support development in the area. For instance, wide range of infrastructure including transport, flood defences, schools, hospitals, other health and social care facilities. That's in the guidance. And it's the levy on infrastructure needed to support the development of their area. Provision of new infrastructure not used to remedy pre-existing deficiencies, and it's used to increase the capacity of existing infrastructure or to repair failing existing infrastructure necessary to support development. So all the time it is talking about supporting new development and a broad range of facilities such as play areas, parks, green spaces, cultural sports facilities and schools, heating schemes, police stations, things like that. So I don't feel that it is intended to apply to those sorts of revenue streams. No. But, you know, I think there is an element of uncertainty there, and certainly we can look into that.
Yeah. I will pass on the message that the answer is no.
On that point, I would have thought the additional revenue costs would be helped to be paid for out of the council tax that would be forthcoming from those houses. But the question in my mind would be how much of the grants that we get for Welsh Government would be, or how much reduction would there be because we have a larger council tax take? In other words, would we gain it in one hand by getting higher council tax, but lose it through the other by getting a reduction from Welsh Government in the grant, the RSG? Am I right in that, or is there something that I'm missing?
Just to say on that point, I think when we get an increased number of houses, then the main factor that will be influenced in terms of the Welsh Government grant that we get is the population statistics for our authority, which influences how much funding we get. But it's all relative. So if our population grows faster than our other authorities in Wales, then we would get proportionately more. But if it doesn't, then we may see no increase at all because everybody's population is growing at the same rate, so the cake is just split the same. There are so many factors in this, it's very difficult to say how that would come through in any funding streams. Obviously, if we've got more houses, we will collect more council tax, and we take that into account when we set our council tax base, which we'll be doing in December. And for next year, for instance, we are estimating that we will be able to collect another £360,000 worth of council tax income because of the growth in number of houses in the authority.
Thank you. Of course, I should have introduced you as Joy Robson, Head of Finance. Thank you. And 151, Officer just keeping us under control. I think Councillor Hobson wishes to come back in.
Yeah, thank you. It's just in response to Mr. Ashworth. You preempted where I was going with my questioning, so let's get on to whole place planning and how that relationship is going to work with town and community councils, particularly with this revenue stream. Does somebody want to talk about where they see whole place planning coming in and benefiting from this investment fund?
I'm happy to set the ball rolling. Yes, because the amount of money that's coming into the authority will, say, not be site-specific anymore. There'll be a significant sum of money becoming available for general infrastructure projects. Then I'm sure that members, when we get to the very detailed stages of how this money is to be spent, will want to look at an area basis for some of the investment. And that area basis will fit in very neatly with the whole place planning approach, and because that will involve the whole community, including the business community, the town and community councils and so on, then that, in our view, your officer's view, is the obvious vehicle then to actually get to specific projects that ought to benefit from the amount of money that's going to become available. So I think this whole process will develop. Martin Davis and I have said in the past, in answer to questions, that at the moment we've got the very broad headings as to how the money should be spent, and then as we go through the consultation processes, we will, in parallel with those consultation processes, detail up how the money should be divided on an area basis if that's what members wish, and then the precise mechanisms, including whole place planning and so on, for the final decisions. So as I say, I see this process as developing, and by the time we get the inspector's agreement to the overall package of expenditure and their main headings, we should be in a position then to have a lot more detail as to how that money will be apportioned to various sectors or areas or whatever members decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members wish to comment? No? Now, normally at this point, I'd open up to the leader of the Labour group, but he's not here, nor another representative. So I'll go straight to the leader of the Independent group, Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. May I just ask two questions? The first one is, I see where the SIL has to, and the reason behind incorporating it, but to use monies to strengthen our 4 major towns, because that's what has been said on the SIL. So we're talking Abergavenny, Monmouth, Caldicot and Chepstow, and putting services and strengthening services within them areas and the structures. I do note on the report there of the Undy issue, and I know Councillor Francis Taylor and previous councillors for that area do still feel that Undy is deprived of services within the county. Now, what we must take into consideration as well, Undy is probably the 5th or 6th largest community within Monmouthshire. And what was just been said there about how this SIL will be distributed, and looking at, let's say, quotations within table 4.2, let's say, Undy will be actually amassing quite a large level of SIL here. What will be the criteria then when that does happen? And another example I'll give you to you, Cabinet, is where I come from, the services, we have to use Abergavenny for them services. Them services are exhausted in the Abergavenny region, and winter services, especially, they are really exhausted for the outer area of the Bryn y Cwm. Now, if the services are still going to be retained within the larger pockets of Monmouthshire, the 4 main towns, what chance have we got as outer areas? And don't forget, I've mentioned Mager and Undy. We are probably the 5th, and Mager and Undy will be the 5th or 6th largest community within Monmouthshire. People who we represent have to travel to get them services, to receive them services, and we accept that. But where there is opportunity to make services better and contribute towards services within them communities, that should happen. This document is not giving us that to do. What we've said there is 106s may be available on the old format, and a percentage will be given back to community councils, not town councils, community councils, to invest within their areas. Now, that may be either probably capital, but to invest that small amount of capital to build services up, you're going to be wanting large masses of capital to carry that out. So an example of Undy, Mager and Undy, is the outer areas of Mager and Undy, which is Cowent and all these places. They could use the services from Meagher-Nundy. So they're a lot nearer to going to Caldicot or Chepstow. And what we need to be careful of here, Deputy Leader, is we don't deprive some of the areas of main structures. And my last question, well, I know we're going out to consultation. That will be heavily thought about and talked about during consultation. And my last point I'd like to make is, during discussions about SIL, during the LDP, Monmouthshire LDP, and National Parks LDP, we scrutinised the senior officer from the National Parks, and I can't remember his name, Mr. Chris Morgan. He's the senior planning officer. And under no circumstances will national parks be introduced in a SIL. So they must be still going to retain the 106 criteria. We manage that 106 criteria for the national parks. It's managed by our legal department. Will that still be retained, or will we withdraw from that and leave it to national parks? And final question, will we then not see any investment into the communities, and I'll just say Gilwan, Gavilan and parts of Lanfoist, if we are then not part of the SIL? They will not introduce SIL. Looking here, SIL is going to be introduced because of the larger developments. What is the threshold for SIL? Because I think the opening statement, I think 106 is five properties or whatever. What we're saying with SIL is it one property? Right. So I need to be clear, where I represent is SIL has got no play for me, and probably that's the 5th largest community within Monmouthshire. What is going to happen to that community then? Will we still retain the old system of the 106s with national parks? Have them conversations taken place with national parks?
You raise a number of very pertinent questions there. Officers, could you help to answer some of those?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. If I can start, and then perhaps my colleague Martin Davis can come in to clarify other issues if I've not covered them. In terms of the national park, obviously we're not the planning authority for the national park, but I'm not aware that any final decision has been taken by the national park to either support the SIL approach or to reject it. So I think the jury is still out on that one as far as I'm aware. But say if colleagues know different, they can correct me. But of course, the Section 106 money will still be available. That is site related. So it wouldn't pick up the individual houses and so on that SIL will do in the Monmouthshire Planning Authority part of Monmouthshire, but you will still have the Section 106 money available. As to how that's spent, then there has been some debate as to whether or not that should be locally spent within the Monmouthshire part of the national park, or is more generally applicable to the wider national park area. But I'd say that's something that's debated on a sort of case-by-case issue, and I know that colleagues from education, housing and so on do their best to ensure that the money is available in the Monmouthshire part. In terms of the overall SIL approach and the Meagher-Nundy question and rural areas and so on, then yes, I would expect the eventual detailed menu of how money should be spent to cover such issues, so that if members wish to apportion part of the money to rural fringes, for example, then that will be in Monmouthshire County Council members' gift. I think, as Kelly Byrne has put it in the past, that what we want to try and avoid is a situation where each little area has its own leisure facility, if the community, including that smaller community, would benefit from one more centralised facility. And that again will be part of the whole place planning approach. So I hope that sense will prevail, that money is spent in the best possible way to maximise the benefit for all. But as I say, that shouldn't be at the expense of rural communities getting nothing, because they're smaller. So I'm sure that's an issue that members will address in due course. I think that probably covers the various points, unless Martin Davis has got anything to add. No, thank you, Deputy Leader.
Thank you for that, George. Simon, do you want to come back on any of that, or are you happy?
No, I'm happy, because if we have the discussion, it's going to come back to full council, and I'm sure we'll have a thorough debate on this, and hopefully we as council. What I don't want to do is this policy and strategy put in place not led by us, led by the Welsh Government, because that means then we may not be able to deviate from what they say down the guidelines, and a lot of our communities actually are gonna they're gonna rely on some of this in future, and we need to make sure that we make the right decision here for everyone.
Okay, thank you. One question that occurs to me is the report says that self-build projects will be exempt, but what exactly constitutes a self-build project? I think we would know that somebody who comes along and builds their own house, that is a self-build project. What occurs if somebody acquires a piece of land and then either goes and asks a builder to build a house on it for them, or they may decide to undertake the project management and get individual trades in to build the house? What would be the situation then? Would they be exempt or not?
There is a detailed definition of self-build in the SIL regulations, and that does include somebody who's building it for themselves, or the point that you just made of if somebody commissions a builder to develop it for them, it does include that as well. And I think the main objective is that they would live within it for a certain period. I think it's 3 years. It's what's called a clawback period in the regulations. But there is a detailed, it's about a page long, 4 paragraphs, detailed definitions of self-build, communal self-build, a clawback period, and the point that you made, they could commission somebody else to do the work for them.
Okay, so we'll have to go and have a look at that document to find the details, but thanks for that anyway. Any other members wish to say anything? Officers, come back and talk. Okay, we move to the recommendation, which is that Cabinet note the contents of this report on the preparatory work being undertaken on the community infrastructure levy, and endorse the preliminary draft charging schedule with a view to issuing for consultation purposes and to recommend to Council accordingly. Members, are you in favour? Okay. Thank you, and we move on to the second item under 4.2, which is the review of additional learning needs strategy and policy. Councillor Hackett-Payne.
Many thanks, Deputy Leader. And if I may, first of all, just give a history of why this is here before us today. And then I'd like to spend a little time going through the actual review and the policy itself, because it is very important, and I feel that we need a little bit of time to go through that. So I hope that's okay, Deputy Leader. First of all, I would like to welcome Kerry Bater and Gwen Phillips, who are part of Steph Hawkins' team. And I would publicly like to thank Steph very much, and her team as well, for this report. An awful lot of hard work has gone into it, and I know that that has been greatly appreciated. So thank you very much for that. And I'd also like to welcome Nikki Wellington on the finance side of things. The reason this is here today is for numerous reasons, one of which it needed a reviewing because it hadn't been done for many years, and things always are ongoing, and it needed to be updated. Plus also, when we had the Estin report, it was noted that as a county there were some recommendations that needed to come out of that. We had quite a lot of children that were statemented, and that needed to be addressed in many ways. So this report has come basically from Estin, but also knowing that the Welsh Government are changing the procedure on statements. And when the white paper goes through, in effect, statements will probably not exist anymore. So this report is proactive, and it's looking at ways that, in effect, the authority will deal with that when it happens. This, at the moment, with a statement, it can take quite a long time for parents to be able to get any support for their child. Up to 26 weeks this process can take. And that's 26 weeks when that child isn't having the support that it needs. This new policy, or the review of the policy, will actually make sure that we are meeting the needs of as many of the additional learning needs children in the county as possible, and doing that within the county itself. It will be putting the child and the family firmly at the centre of this policy, and it's moving away from the local authority holding the money, and in effect schools will be central to this process, and that is seen by parents and the schools themselves as really a step forward. This will also ensure equality as well across the county. That's really why the policy is here in front of us today, and it sets out in great detail what can be expected from the schools, what can be expected from the authority, and I think from a parent's perspective, the clarity that is given has been extremely welcomed. And we know this originated from parents themselves. I know that the team have done various consultations speaking to parents whose children do benefit from the support that is given to them, and listening to them, and they felt that there needed to be clarity about who did what and how it was done. So this was an opportunity to be able to address that. When we actually look at the policy itself, this is looking at the additional learning needs, and this is an umbrella term used to describe individuals or groups of learners with a diverse and often complex range of needs. And this term, additional learning needs, can also take into consideration a disability, medical needs, gaps in a child's knowledge because of perhaps prolonged absences from the educational system, perhaps a child's been in hospital, difficult family circumstances, and educational inconsistencies, perhaps if they are gypsy or traveller pupils. The additional needs service seeks to identify and support these pupils, so there is a sort of practical and flexible learning there. If I just go through this and pick out relevant points, because I think actually reading through it, it gives you a good understanding of the definitions and the terms of reference. It explains about who was consulted, the outcomes of the consultation process. And if I'm just going to pick up on various points down here, just bear with me. 206 is the page I'm looking at. Here we are. This policy also has been run in conjunction with the 21st Century Schools programme, and with the 4 new schools that we're building in the county, the 4 new secondary schools, we've been looking at the additional learning need facilities within those 4 schools. At the moment, they tend to be north and south of the county, but when we have the 4 schools built, there will be equality there in all of the secondary schools. So that is something that has been added to the programme. We set out the vision statement and the aims and objectives. The roles and responsibilities. Through the partnership working, the authority will be responsible for various bullet points here that are set out to provide parents and pupils so that they can access specialist staff, keep up to date with guidance and provision. And then it says what the schools will do, and that is also set out as well. So it's there in black and white. This goes on then. Sorry, I can't scroll down it any quicker. Again, it talks about early identification, what the authority does, what the schools do. And this goes through picking out all the criteria concerned with the additional learning needs. It also sets out as well what we have in our authority, the provisions we have at present over mono. It sets out how many children are there and what the specialist teachers do. But in effect, the ALN policy is looking at all schools and the progression of support that will be given to a child who does need extra support. And that starts off at a fairly basic level and then moves up depending on the need of the child. And again, all those elements are put in the report. It's quite difficult not to be able to flee. So it defines what dyslexia is, it defines what children with specific learning difficulties, what that actually is, and what the school needs to do, what parents do, and what the authority does. So again, that is set out. When to overcome the position with the Welsh Government removing the statements, the authority, Monmouthshire County Council, is adding an extra addition to the support it gives at present, and that is called a SAPRA, and I'm just going to try and find that. So in effect, that would be taking the place of statement in many respects, and again it sets out what the child's needs are, how the school will address that, and how the authority will. I'll just see if I can scroll down any quicker than I... There we go. So we have the school action is the first entry of criteria, and it states here that the pupil will have regular or consistent difficulties in accessing the curriculum, and the pupil requires support over and above the normal classroom differentiation. So that's for school action. The next criteria would be school action plus. And again, it sets out that the pupil's main difficulty would be with cognition and learning. And again, it sets out the various tests that would be taken. And then moving on to the school action plus the SAPRA, which doesn't exist at the moment and would be the new addition to the policy. And again, it sets out the pupil's main difficulty is in the area of cognition and learning, and in effect that the pupil has received additional and appropriate support at School Action Plus over the last 2 terms and has made no progress or very little progress. So the difficulties continue and there are substantial barriers to learning, and then extra support would be placed with that child. So in effect, we have a new policy here that is going to put the child who needs extra support at the centre. The budget will go to the schools, and there will be more timely help for the parents. They don't have to wait for a statement to come. They don't have to wait 26 weeks or so. So all in all, I can see that this is as a positive move forward. It will reduce the number of statements because we have too many, as pointed out by Estin. And when we get to the point that the Welsh Government cease to have statements, we'll be in a position that, in effect, we've been proactive, we've reviewed our policy, and there will not need to be a sort of change at all because it will be seamless from the start of this policy. So it is... I think this is a good policy. It has been through Select and it's had various consultations, and I think it is a positive way forward, and I most certainly recommend it to Cabinet today.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, I'm sure we all recognised from the Estin report the need to bring forward a new strategy and policy, and a strategy and policy that also gave perhaps a more timely recognition of the needs of pupils with additional learning needs. And this should see a quicker implementation of the necessary help for those pupils. So I think it's something to be certainly applauded. And my goodness, it doesn't half go into some detail. It must have taken a heck of a lot of writing. And congratulations to those who produced this report, because you have seemed to have covered off every possible avenue that there could be to cover off. And I certainly think it's a long but excellent report. Members, anybody like to make comments? No? Officers, would you like to come in at this point? No? All right. So I go to Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Just a couple of questions I'd like to ask, really. We're saying we've been criticised by Estin for the amount of statements that we've made over a period. 26 weeks, yes, is not good enough, but I'm sure the thoroughness that we have been carrying out in making them statements has been thorough. The words of "we've got too many" in statement from the Welsh Government, for me, doesn't wear, because there must be a reason that we've done that. The concern I have with putting this back onto the schools is, first of all, will we have enough staff to carry out the process in the future to help the schools? Who will be the lead with this in the schools to take? Would that be the Senko officer or the Senko teacher, who may need lots of training in them, because they're going to give a lot more responsibility here to the schools to this is a challenge for them, because they're going up to the next step. They're being asked to do something probably a lot tougher than picking the phone and saying, look, can you send somebody out here? We feel we need to have a chat about a young person. I'd just like to know what the process of that would be, reference to the schools. The funding is available, you've said that, for the schools, but what happens when excess funding or more funding will be required? Will they have to go to an appeal, or will their teacher? How will that happen? Because that is going to possibly happen. And my final question then is do the schools have a right of appeal if they believe that we're not supporting them properly? And where do the parents go then if they feel they're not having the right direction? Do they go to the schools and put the time on the schools, or do they go back then to the ALN team to, let's say, make an appeal? What is the direction on that? It is a good report, but it's trying to work your way around all the little abbreviations. All I know is a Senko in my school, and that's probably the first path of somebody with special education needs within the school goes to. And I just couldn't get my head around some of the terminations in there. And governing bodies will be having to probably have a good look at this to see, because ultimately they will be responsible then for setting budgets, etc., and making sure that they can balance the budgets. Thank you.
Councillor Hackett-Payne.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howarth. And if I forget any of the questions, please remind me, because there were quite a few there. First of all, training is being put in place for all ALN governors. I think it's beginning of next year. So that is already being thought about before. The school Senkos have all been consulted on this, and they're positive about it. Can I just point out that, in effect, schools will not be doing anything different than they're doing at the moment. It's not as if we have children with statements somewhere else and they're going to be brought into our schools. They are in our schools at present. So the teaching staff and whatever have all those techniques, all those plans in place for being able to support a child with a statement. So supporting a child with a SAPRA will not be any different as far as needs, time, capacity, etc. So that is already happening. So in effect, the difference in this policy and what we have at the moment is that the SAPRA takes over from the statement. So, like I say, there are children in our schools at the moment with statements, and the teaching staff and whatever make provision in the most apt way for those children. That won't change. There is a section here I think it's on page 242, about funding and how that funding takes place. I may bring Nikki in just to help me out on the funding side of things. Again, the funding is with the schools, so we take out that layer of bureaucracy that exists at the moment that parents don't like, the having to ask the authority for some of the money. The funding comes in various funding streams depending on the need of that child, but there is and depending on the premises, etc., there's various fundings. Also, schools are asked to keep 5% of their budget when it comes in for additional learning needs. Then, depending on the level of need, will depend whether they get any extra funding. If I could perhaps bring Nikki in, perhaps to make a little more sense of it than I can.
Yeah, schools get various levels of funding. All schools what we call a lump sum funding. So that's based on moderate learning needs, and it's based on a deprivation factor. We're currently using ACORN data at the moment, but that will shortly change after consultation. There's another element of funding that schools receive where children have more severe learning difficulties, and that is based on band funding. So that is where a child needs 75 to 100% support. That funding will change with the child. So if the child leaves a school, the funding goes. If a child comes into a school, the funding will be awarded to that school. The third element of funding is for children that for schools that host our units, and therefore we give specific funding for those units.
Coming back in on the process, I think that was one of your other questions, Councillor Howarth. And again, you may have to help me out on this. As far as I'm aware, again, it's in the report, each child will have a form that will be filled in, and exactly the same as with the EAS, how they track every individual child to ensure that the progress is being made. That will happen with a child with additional learning needs, so you can ensure that their progress is being made and they're not getting left behind. The process in the school for who takes, in effect, responsibility is set out quite clearly here. But there is a report, and that then is liaised, if I'm right, with the council's additional learning needs section, and you will ensure that that is appropriate. And is it every term or half term it's reviewed?
The plan is for it to be reviewed half-termly, so we're talking about 6 to 8 weeks between process rather than the current, as you say, 26 weeks. The other question you asked was about appeal. If somebody's not happy about that, obviously we would expect initially to be in discussions with the school and with the parents. But if beyond that they're unhappy, the facility will then be there for them to appeal to the SEN tribunal, which currently doesn't exist. At the moment, you can only appeal to the tribunal at the final stage of a statement, which is right at the end of the process. But with the new system that's coming in, you would be able to appeal at any point.
And the one was about the team, the ALN team we have within Monmouthshire, with what we're going through in the next 12 months. Is the team adequately staffed and funded? Because I know there has been moves last year, and I haven't seen any mandate for it this year, but I just want to know whether the team will be strong enough to take this to the next stage with this new SAPRA. I've got it there. So.
I believe they will, but they can answer from themselves.
Yes, obviously we'd like to think that we are. We're dealing with the same number of children, and the difficulties that the children present are the same as they are at present under the old system. It's just a question of applying the new process, using the SAPRA. It's going to be a learning curve for everybody, but the criteria is so much tighter now. We will be able to say quite clearly, we can see where every child fits.
Thank you, everyone. Any other questions from Cabinet colleagues, or do you want to come back, Councillor Howarth? Okay. All right, well, in fact, we move to the recommendations, and there is just one recommendation in 2.1, and it is this, that members approve the additional or updated additional learning needs strategy and policy for pupils with additional learning needs across Monmouthshire for full implementation in all schools and settings within the authority. Members, are you happy with that? Thank you. And with that, that brings our meeting to a close, well within the hour. Thank you, Cabinet members, Councillor Howarth, and officers for attending. Thank you very much.